Right, in the last one we talked about the functions of blood, how blood can be taken from the body, the two components of blood being plasma and the formed elements. Now we're actually going to get into the individual specifics of those two components of blood. We're going to talk about plasma first. Plasma does, in fact, have a yellow look to it. Plasma is pretty sweet. If you want to make some money in college, they pay kind of good amount of money for you to go donate plasma, but you're limited to the amount of times you can donate plasma within a week, within a month, things like that. But I can remember it paying about $50 for every time you donated, which is pretty good money considering college kids are broke, which is why college kids make money off plasma. So, 55% of your blood is plasma, and plasma is 92% water. That is a big major reason why when you drink water, you actually, in high amounts, you actually have to pee more frequently, because when you take in more water goes into your blood. The more water in your blood, the higher your blood pressure, the downward swing you get in function of different parts. So your kidneys start filtering some of that water out to balance all that back out. Okay. Most of your plasma, besides being water, is dissolved proteins, and your plasma is actually created in your liver. Your liver is a huge, large, uber important structure within the body, and most of your blood is actually located in the liver rather than being throughout the entire body. Some of the proteins that are dissolved within that plasma is going to be things like albumins. Albumins are the most abundant, and they contribute to your osmotic pressure. Basically what that means is albumin proteins are the ones that allow fluids and transfer of water, particularly in and out of cells. You have globulins. Globulins are antibodies or immunoglobulins, and their main function in terms of protein is they attack foreign proteins and pathogens. They also aid in the transport of different ions and hormones and things like that. So they are essentially a type of transport protein, but they transport them throughout the blood system to different cells rather than that particular chemical just traveling by itself. You also have what's called fibrinogen. Fibrinogen is a majorly important protein that assists in blood clotting along with platelets. It creates a fibrous network to trap red blood cells, make the clot bigger and more sound. So let's take a look at how you would go about donating plasma.
Here, so I could get money to drive home. And then I just started doing it ever since I came back my sophomore year.
Many students, like Lynn, flock to places like BioLife Plasma Services to earn cash in return for their plasma, the pale yellow liquid found only in blood used to make life-saving medicines. The process is similar to donating blood, except the donor is hooked up to a special machine that separates the plasma from the blood and substitutes the saline solution for the extracted plasma. The saline-enriched blood is then returned to the donor. One CMU student's boyfriend earns more money donating plasma than she does working a part-time job.
Well, Jason does BioLife twice a week, and he's been doing it for 2 years, and I work at Meyer, or I did work at Meyer, and he made more money than I did in a week because BioLife pays really well.
At BioLife, people are encouraged to donate the maximum amount with incentives like $200 a month and the chance to win additional gift certificates and prizes. The Mount Pleasant BioLife website states, donate 6 times in April and be entered to win a $50 home improvement gift card. Receive a bonus entry on your 7th and 8th donation of the month.
There's no limit on the number of times you can donate plasma, except for the limit that regards the 2 times in 7 days. You can donate twice a year. You can donate as many times a year as that time frame will allow.
The FDA limits the number of times a
donating plasma. Now let's actually look at the process of taking your blood and separating it into the specific components. So that is how they separate your blood into plasma and formed elements. Let's talk about, now that we've talked about plasma and the fact that it's 55% of your blood volume, 92% water, and largely composed of proteins of different function, let's get into the formed elements. Your formed elements compose 45% of your blood, and most of it's going to be erythrocytes, leukocytes, and platelets. Erythrocytes is a fancy word for red blood cells, erythro meaning red cell, and their main function is to transport oxygen and carbon dioxide throughout the body. Leukocytes are the white blood cells. Their main job, and they have many of them, I think that you're going to learn about 6 different types, is defense against the defense of the body against toxins and pathogens. Then you also have platelets. Plates are going to be very small, membrane enclosed packets of cytoplasm. Believe it or not, platelets are essentially sheds of what are called a megakaryocyte. It's a giant cell that actually constantly sheds parts of its cell membrane and cytoplasm, and inside of that packet it contains enzymes and factors that actually help in clotting your blood. So how do you get all of these 3 items in your body? Well, we learned back when we did the skeletal system that your bones inside of them, specifically a lot of the long flat bones, have bone marrow in them that perform hematopoiesis or hemopoiesis. And it's in the red marrow of bone, not yellow marrow because that's largely lipids, but the red marrow creates the cells necessary for the formed elements to exist. And that video no longer exists, but it did yesterday. Wonderful. But anyways, so if we take a look at this, you will see that this is the femur. It actually creates, in the red marrow, red blood cells, white blood cells of, there's 5 different types there, and actually platelets. All of those things created in your bone marrow. Now you know why bone marrow or cancer of the bone marrow is such a big deal and how it is such a tremendous concept to donate marrow to individuals who need it. Let's get into the specifics of each of the formed elements. Red blood cells or erythrocytes contain this pigment or this protein called hemoglobin. Hemoglobin has a little element of iron ion embedded in it, which actually is the essential component that allows oxygen and carbon dioxide to be transported throughout the body. When oxygen is attached, it gives, because of the oxygen being attached, it gives it this really bright red color, and without oxygen being attached, it has a dark red color. If we go back to talking about hemoglobin real quick, a lot of people that are considered anemic, meaning they lack iron in their diet or sufficient amount of iron in their diet to actually have a normal functioning red blood cell. What that essentially means is the symptoms of anemia include things like fatigue, tiredness, bruise easily, all of these things, largely because if they don't have the iron on that hemoglobin molecule, they can't actually bind oxygen to be transported, so your oxygen's not being delivered to your cells efficiently, which causes you to fatigue or become tired. The average red blood cell life is about 40 to 120 days, and they can actually kind of go away in multiple forms, but essentially when its life is over, it can either just flat out rupture and be eliminated as waste in urine, or it's actually engulfed by other phagocytic cells that actually recognize the fact that the red blood cell is old, and it gets rid of them for them. When those cells are destroyed, or when those red blood cells are engulfed, they actually have the hemoglobin molecule is recycled in the circulatory system. So it does have the ability to kind of be a little bit more efficient. After it ruptures or breaks down, like we said, it's filtered out by the kidneys and excreted as urine as waste. Boom, red blood cell. Biconcave. 99.9% of all the formed elements in your blood, red blood cells. Alright, their function, carry oxygen and carbon dioxide throughout the body. Their structure is called a disc, or it's a biconcave, bi meaning two, concave meaning it bows in. Has like a reddish pink color to it. Here's a nice three-dimensional image, computer enhanced. Here's a real blood slide. If you notice, you can definitely tell that 99.9% of blood is composed of red blood cells. All of these pinkish discs everywhere are red blood cells. I also want you to pay attention to the fact that these red blood cells have no definitive internal characteristics that allow you to say, oh, these are cells, because they have no nucleus. In here, they also don't have any mitochondria. In here, these are white blood cells. Look at how they are 2, 3, 4 times the size of any red blood cell. They also have a nucleus, and within that cell or cytoplasm or other, they call them granules, red granules, which are other essential components that are necessary for the function of the white blood cell. You also notice that the white blood cells are in fact not as numerous. The next formed element we're going to get to are platelets. Platelets have a very irregular structure or pattern to them, and really and truly they are a fragment or a shed fragment of a white blood cell called a megakaryocyte. They do have a purple color, and they have a purple color under a microscope. They're significantly smaller than red blood cells. Their main function, they need to clot blood in sites of injury. Percentage, little bit greater than 0.05% of all your blood cells in the formed elements. And like I said, they're formed from what are called megakaryocytes that continually shed cytoplasm in packets containing the enzymes necessary to be called a platelet. If you look at this, you can tell that it is smaller. If you look here, this is enhanced quite a bit, but red blood cells, white blood cells, and all these purplish little irregularly shaped packets are going to be your platelets. All right, what we're getting into now are all the different types of white blood cells. When we do the formed elements microscope lab, we're going to dive into this a little bit more, but you're going to be required to, in a blood slide, or it's called a blood smear, find all of these white blood cells based on their physical characteristics. When you go take your test, you're going to be given things like a scenario, like, oh, Johnny was diagnosed with a bacterial infection in his lungs and blah, 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 blah. Blood test was done. Which of the following white blood cells would they expect to be found in higher concentrations? Well, you'd have to know what the pathogen or toxin or microorganism infecting the body was before you could actually determine which type of white blood cell is going to be in greater number, because your body will react based on the pathogen. So let's talk about neutrophils. Some of the defining characteristics of neutrophils. Embedded within the cell membrane, you're going to find that neutrophils are the most numerous, but they have what are called 2 to 5 lobes of a nucleus. If you look at this picture right here, you'll see that it kind of looks like just circles connected within each other, but they are different lobes of a nucleus, and you're going to have 2 to 5. And there's going to be very, very small, not as numerous red granules embedded within that cytoplasm. Their main function, fight bacterial infection. They find bacteria, they engulf them, digest them, crap them out, and they're eliminated as waste. Out of all of the white blood cells, keep in mind, white blood cells compose less than 1% of your total blood cell volume, but these neutrophils compose 60% or 70% of that. And here's what you have in terms of a neutrophil. Notice it has 1, 2, 3 lobes of the nucleus, tiny red granules within it. And this is another example. This one here, different stain, but it has a little bit more of a purplish tint to it, but you can still see the small red granules embedded within there. So eosinophils. Eosinophils are a different type of white blood cell. They basically have 2 lobes of a nucleus with very large red granules embedded in them. So the other ones were small and not as numerous. These are going to be very large. That very large is going to give them a distinctive color within, but their main thing is they fight allergic reactions and parasites. They also control inflammation at the site of injury. Their percentage, 2 to 4% of all white blood cells, so definitely not as numerous. These are going to be the hardest ones to find in your lab, but if you look here, super large red granules with only 2 lobes of the nucleus inside of there. A higher magnification, again, 2 lobes, large red granules. There's not that there's a lot of red granules, it's just that the ones that are there are extremely large. Then you have basophils. Basophils are going to be the smallest white blood cell. They have a blue granule embedded within the cytoplasm, and they have an oval nucleus that basically fills the entire cell. Not that it's a 2-lobe nucleus, it is an oval nucleus that almost takes up the entire inside portion of the cell. Their main thing is they prevent blood clots from occurring within your blood vessels. That's an important deal. Blood clots in your blood vessels can cause things like cardiovascular disorders, heart attacks, etc. And so their main thing is they cause inflammation and increase blood flow to your injuries or to your sites of injury because, again, blood carries all the necessary nutrients to help out your cells. If you have an injury, it's important that you increase blood flow, which is why you have inflammation and swelling. Their percentage, less than 0.1% or 0.1% to 1% of all white blood cells. If you notice here, you can't really see much because of the large blue granules and a nucleus that kind of takes up the entire portion of the cell. Alright, we're going to group lymphocytes together as one. You don't have to distinguish B and T lymphocytes, but they're super large, round nucleus with a very smooth looking cytoplasm. Their function is to produce antibodies. Antibodies fight infection for things such as a viral attack in cancerous cells. They combine 20 to 25% of all white blood cells. These are the easiest ones to find. They're huge and they have this great big old round nucleus embedded within the cytoplasm. Monocytes. Monocytes are also a pretty easy one to identify. They are the absolute largest. They're twice the size of a red blood cell, and they have this bean or neck pillow, you know those pillows that you wear on an airplane, shaped nucleus. They can actually leave blood vessels, go into the interstitial fluid, and actually destroy damaged blood cells, which is a very important thing because you don't want those accumulating within the body. They're 3 to 8% of all of your white blood cells. Definitely huge. Bean-shaped nucleus, bluish purple tint to it. Here's another one. Almost looks like a cheese puff nucleus. Here's a summary of all of your different white blood cells and what they do. So your neutrophils, bacteria. Take out the multi-lobe nucleus, red granules. Basophils release histamine, which is essentially the thing that causes you to have a stuffy nose and allergic reactions to various things like pollen and whatnot. Eosinophils, parasitic infections, and they actually kick off the allergic response. Lymphocytes, they produce antibodies, they regulate the immune response. And then you have monocytes, they engulf cellular debris, meaning the waste products that are kind of there from cells being destroyed and things like that. And they actually have the antigen processing system. And that's where we're going to stop in that part 2. If you have any questions, you know where to find me. Best of luck.